Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this fourth session of the AIP conference. My name is Sarah and I'll be chairing, and I'm looking forward to hearing our speakers bringing diverse perspectives on the unique interactions of human and more than animal lives, resistance and collaboration. Today we have three excellent speakers. First, we will welcome Anissa Bejaoui, a master's student from Canisius University in the USA, who will examine how more than human animals are being reframed in the public imagination as resistance fighters. Then we will be joined by Sima Zali Tktau, a master's student from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, who will discuss post-anthropocentric alliances in the context of extractivism in Latin America. Finally, we'll hear from Reka, an undergraduate student at Anglia Ruskin University in the UK, who will share insights on the retirement of assistance dogs and the resources available for users navigating this transition. Okay, so Anissa's asked me to share her video, and we're welcoming Anissa, whose research explores more than human animals who are being recast as resistance fighters in the public moral imagination, engaging with critical animal studies and the ethics of care. Her presentation is titled Lions and Orcas and Otters, Oh My, Animals as Resistance Fighters. And I'm going to press the button now, Anissa.
I'm Anissa, and I'm here to take you on a short and hopefully fun journey of radical acts of animal resistance in the visual vernacular that has come to represent those acts. The title of this presentation, Lions and Orcas and Otters, Oh My, provides a subtle clue to the kinds of species we'll be encountering. So before jumping in, here's a brief overview of my talk. I will begin with an introduction that lays out my somewhat revisionist agenda, then provide some context and the crux of my argument before moving on to a little bit about animal resistance and then focusing on the three mini case studies. And I'll actually discuss them in opposite order from the title. So just so you know, my argument adopts an avowedly optimistic tone. So what is my argument? Well, this audience of animal scholars is undoubtedly familiar with the animal turn and the witnessing of the animal moment. Well, I'm suggesting that we are anew witnessing the animal moment. I'm also suggesting that, contrary to Randy Malamud, the animal's cultural context no longer supplants its natural context. So what do I mean by this? I mean that the animal's cultural habitat, its representation, is becoming more closely aligned with its environmental habitat. There may even be reason, I conjecture, to believe that the disappearance of animals in the sense articulated by John Berger is out of fashion. Berger was concerned with the dissolution of the empirical animal from our collective imagination. But central to my thesis is that the real embodied animal have made their way into the public moral imagination. To be clear here, I'm not suggesting that their reappearance results from an increase in their numbers, because they are, as we all know, objectively and regrettably still very, very diminished. Instead, I'm advancing the idea that animals have interjected themselves. They have actively intercepted our gaze so that we are forced to look at them, and they have done so willingly and intentionally. Furthermore, and sort of echoing Gary Marvin, central to the concern of how we look at animals is how the nature of that looking at is fundamental to how the animals are responded to. Ergo, my second point contends that as a result of looking, we have become more attentive to how we see and therefore how we represent animals. And this has led us to more easily engage with speculative fabulation and storied agency that recognizes not only a species' history, as in its natural and cultural history, but also the individual animal's own coherent history. So, To persuade you, I present 3 mini case studies, Otter841, Orcas, and Tsavo lions, that illustrate how animals are engaging in autobiographical acts and how the public response, as it appears through memes and headlines, has figured these, in the Haraway sense of the word figured, as the radical acts of heroic resistance fighters. All 3 cases acknowledge the animal's worldly involvement in the politically charged climate of relations between animals and society. And taken together, they author a multi-species critique of the dominant world system as unjust, as oppressive, and as environmentally unjustifiable. And they provoke us, at least I hope they provoke us, to rethink our responsibility to our fellow non-humans. So as I go through these case studies, I urge you to think about how this biographical reframing of animals' acts of resistance highlights the institutional assemblages that comprise our human-animal entanglement, and also to think about how they bring the public into the critical discourse on anthroprivilege and speciesism that has thus far been contained within the academy. Because to me, what is so outlandishly optimistic about this perspective is how it recognizes animals as embodied practitioners of both ecological and cultural agency. And also how it engages with theoretical aspects of caste that seek to liberate animals from their metaphorical placeholders, and move them into the agental, the real, the reactionary. So quick word on context here. I think I've already mentioned that this thesis adopts a fairly optimistic tone. I should also mention that I'm aware it makes its claim amidst an intractable embeddedness of specious practices in media and journalism. In as much as I recognize that animals remain absent reference, despite greater media coverage since the COVID-19 pandemic, I don't think we can ignore the derivative emergence of a new vocabulary, nascent though it may be, that has given rise to governance frames such as One Nature and One Health, both of which take an integrated and unified approach to the well-being of people, animals, and ecosystems. As far as I can see, I don't think it's a coincidence that this re-narrativization should take place in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, as it was precisely the conditions of the pandemic that instigated a reflection on our commodification of animals, and that paved the way for these biographies that reach beyond the human as a way of speaking for or on behalf of animal others. So what is animal resistance? Well, stories of animal resistance serve to communicate that animals, like human resistors, seek liberation from human exploitation. Although these stories are disseminated in the public realm, they often inadvertently produce objectified conceptions of animals as moral objects to be studied rather than subjects who have their own ideas about how they want to live their lives. Many of the animal activist models that are manipulated by the likes of PETA and Greenpeace employ sentimentality and images of cruelty and suffering to speak visually of animal injustice. For example, take this story of rescued piglets fallen off a transport truck. These kinds of emotionally resonant narratives that attest to the victimhood of domestic livestock animals, well, they're all too well known. They work across affective registers, but they tend to cast animal struggles as futile resistance, whereas I contend that new multi-species storytelling casts these struggles not as futile, but as heroic and radical autobiographical acts against systemic oppression. So it makes animals the subject of their own struggle, and it locates them at the center of their own liberation movement. So without further ado, Otter841. Otter841 is the quintessential boundary transgressor. Born in captivity at Monterey Bay Aquarium, this female southern sea otter was released into the wild 2 years later. Despite assertions by authorities such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that she was raised with minimal human contact, Otter 841 earned celebrity after repeated aggressive interactions like biting and stealing surfboards in the waters off Santa Cruz, California during the summer of 2023. As scholars like Sarah Colling point out, in transgressing boundaries and escaping confinement and fighting back against oppressors, animals demonstrate intentionality and they demonstrate resistance. And traditionally, a deep uneasiness occurs for human observers when animals, either domestic or wild, transgress these human spatial orderings. In spite of this, public reaction to Otter 841, who has endearingly been nicknamed Laverna, Roman goddess of thieves, has been decidedly positive. After attempts to haze and capture her failed, 841's antics went viral and generated memes in support of her freedom, successfully forcing the suspension of U.S. Fish and Wildlife efforts to capture her. So in addition to an Instagram page dedicated to Otter 841 on the left there, that boldly proclaims her the Lorax of the seas, which I imagine is a cheeky reference to the Zeusian critique of the contradictions of industrial capitalism, headlines also dubbed her an adorable outlaw. So, like observations that have been made by Isfahani, Hammond, and other scholars, that the countless memes attest to the popular narrative of Laverna as an icon of resistance. These observations are actually given a lot of context by philosophies like that of Donna Haraway that remark that public discourse is a mode of power with fundamental social effect. And I think the public's investment in the personal development of this cute little mustelid protagonist has cast her as a charismatic subject of an individual life. We have these visual representations that engage with dimensions of storytelling. And the effect of these is really to renew science by changing the story and by setting the object differently. Storytelling becomes a strategy of science or of multi-species research that diversifies our understanding of place and of voice. So Otter 841 is not only a representative of her species, but she's a pioneer plucked from the general, right? She has a distinctive character and temperament, and her exploits command a social presence. So moving on to orcas, a pod of orcas sinking yachts off the coast of the Iberian Peninsula is advancing a narrative of righteous indignation over the wrongful encroachment of capitalistic greed. The attacks, which began in 2020 and have since increased in range and frequency, which has actually prompted the conjecture that this learned behavior has been culturally transmitted throughout the subpopulation, has been met with a slew of memes and merchandise and headlines, like this one here is the whale world rising up. So there's actually quite a lot going on with this pod of orcas, and I'll just gloss over it. But essentially, it was after the Atlantic staff writer Jacob Stern wrote a piece entitled "Killer Whales Are Not Our Friends, Stop Rooting for the Orcas Ramming Boats," that the internet then announced its intention to side with Team Orca and began to insinuate that the piece had perhaps been secretly written by either a boat or a leopard seal. So it was all really quite amusing. And as evidenced by this catalog of imagery here, discomfort with the idea that orcas are challenging the way we expect the natural world to behave, which was quoted several times, has definitely not been universal. Instead, the public position seems to be aligned with the intellectual perspective that expressions of animal behavior are a sensitive index of anthropogenic impact. And, we should listen to them. So As humorous as the public dialogue surrounding the orcas has been, this sort of more charitable way of interpreting their behavior not only recognizes them as biographical subjects acting with agency, but also makes a claim for a new form of interspecies relationships. And I think this is really interesting because although different, it's not entirely at odds with the work of researchers like Jane Goodall and other ethnographers who highlight the realities of hybrid communities. So, cheerfully playing off symbols of proletarian solidarity, these visual representations of whales suggest violent, yes, but also righteous protest aimed at upsetting the power imbalance. They're depicted as chanting, "Sink the rich and down with capitalism." And in doing so, they emerge as spokespersons in a politics of resistance that is essentially contesting hierarchical structures of speciesism and also underscoring the parallels of speciesism with the dominance of one group over another. All right, so the famous Tsavo lions, or I should say the infamous Tsavo lions. Whereas the casting of marine mammals as revolutionaries seems like a projection of desires for habitable ecosystems and accountability, capitalistic accountability, the Tsavo lions serve as an example of the temporal relevance of this re-narrativization that is taking place and that is shaping new interpretations of historical contexts and also of social justice. So departing a little bit from the previous two examples, but still very pertinent to the ecologies of representation, the restoring of the infamous Tsavo lions operates within frameworks of animal studies and also post-colonial eco-critique to assert the unique historical interdependencies of human, animal, and ecological concerns. The legend of the man-eating lions of Tsavo, you guys no doubt already know, has spawned a number of films, including the Academy Award-winning The Ghost in the Darkness, which was categorized as a historical horror on account of the nights of terror caused by these insatiable beasts who preyed upon construction workers indentured to the British government during the building of the Uganda-Mombasa railway line. But today's headlines of the Tsavo lions have largely replaced man-eater with resistance fighter and beast with hero. Headlines like this one tell of the repatriation efforts that are currently underway to have the lions return to Kenya, where they will take up residence in the Museum of Heroism. So the lions are being hailed as, and here I quote, protecting their territory against the penetration of Africa by foreigners. So it transpires that humans are not the only meaningful agents. When we consider the animal as viewer instead of the viewed, when we acknowledge their gaze, we are rethinking and contesting circuits of power and identity, transnational circuits of power and identity. But more than that, we're also changing the story by reimagining who we are, what we might become, and with whom we might be in alliance. So to wrap this up, what promotes these lions and Otter 841 and the Orcas too, away from their totemic ascription, animals are good to think, is their direct acts of resistance. Representations though they may be, these are not human-authored social critiques relayed through animal masks, right? The animals themselves are liberated through their autobiographical acts and through the human recognition of the agency and subjectivity indispensable to those acts. I think permitting such a recognition delegitimizes hegemonic Western interpretations that have dominated socio-historic understanding of events. And it also upholds the belief that decisions must transpire in the presence of those who will bear their consequences. In the case of the Tsavo lions in particular, it also attends to the often neglected existence of animals during the land appropriation process under colonialism. So there's a growing public position that the environment, whether land or sea, is an idea that designates our home as much as it designates the home of other species. And this position makes progress towards redressing the postmodern dislocations that Malamud is so concerned about. The idea that an animal's habitat is becoming irrelevant except as a historic curiosity. I think we can begin to imagine a reconciliation of animals' cultural habitat with their environmental one, which to me suggests an interspecies solidarity in the making, one that raises critical questions, questions like whose environment, whose history? And these examples demonstrate the importance of the animal gaze in the construction of political ecological discourse, not only how they look, but where they are looking and to what. And that wraps it up. Thank you. And I welcome your questions.
So next we have Sima Zali Tktau, whose interdisciplinary work integrates post-humanist and feminist theories to explore the impacts of extractivist infrastructures on interspecies and ecological relationships, particularly in the Lithium Triangle. Their presentation, titled Postanthropocentric Worlding in the Lithium Triangle, Interspecies, Alliances and Resistances in Latin American Extractivist Infrastructures. And we welcome Sima. Thank you very much.
You see my presentation?
Yes, I can see some lines with the black background. Thank you.
That's the beginning. Well, yeah, I'm an anthropologist and I'm grounded in the colonial and cyber xenofeminism, as well as new materialism and speculative realism, since most of my postgraduate background is contemporary philosophical. Well, the Earth, which has many other names in both literate and non-literate languages, as a bodily planetary system, is connected to every element, being and her territories of the named existence. In new eco-geologics of the relations with beings of the Earth and the infrastructures on which the Earth itself is built, extractivism kills the body's territories of the Earth, slowly, piece by piece, making it impossible to live life and to be on the lands of the particularities of our planet, which can be called any form, desirably disintegrating binaries between the so-called human, non-human, and environment, without showing what it means to be being non-human, because all biochemical processualities are in a constant reprogramming, which problematize also the so-called living and non-living, because there are many ways of being in and with one's territory. And in my work, I would like to show you the Lithium Triangle, which better to name the locality area of Lithium Crescent, given the new research openings of the number of geological entities called lithium that inhabit these territories, politically between three countries, including Argentina. So not opening the concept of them, but we, the concept of complex we, according to Marisol de la Cadena, and Peruvian anthropologist, but it can also be named as complicated, especially in our relationship with some beings and entities. Then we are communities of complex, complicated we. And opening discussion of multiple alliances and resistances already interterrestrial in Latin American extractivist zones, I plan to be contradictory, like Verge de Castro, Brazilian anthropologist, with the title of my presentation, because I have a critical vision of the conceptualizations of interspecies and multispecies, because it does not show the interconnectedness with the entities that are not in phylogenetic matrix. And it's a necessary to open up to all non-anthropocentric ecologics of relations in pluriverse, according to Arturo Escobar, Colombian anthropologist, where cosmolocal affective bodies, also breaking the binaries between human and its surroundings and their neighbors, are being in being in and with the earth as a noun, or being with the earth as a verb. It is to be with the earth as a part of one's own corporeality, and to be on the earth altogether. Therefore, it can be proposed that any body territory be called um, being earth. A term has multiplicity in explaining how to be among any phylogenetic, technological, and planetary efficacy. And the ontological terms that are reprogramming the notion of being in the humanities and social sciences align with the Western-centric philosophy of ontology. And it's still quite Eurocentric, especially when talking about being Earths that are not part of the processes of the human ontological. Therefore, with ontological openings to the contrary that propose to see multiple decolonized worlds, which are necessary to construct a theoretical compass of the desired connection of the post-humanist, indigenous, cosmotheoretical, the post-natural, the decolonial, speculative realist, new materialist, etc. Being with a multiplicity of theories and disciplines that all should review their methodologies, which do not question the anthropos in the existent and unconscious, and placing ourselves in affective terms of the interdisciplinary, being in pluriversity, not in universities, continuing on this eco-geo and zoopoetic emergencies that was before this session, cosmotheories and methodologies. All this is better than discussing about anthropos because it's a necessary. It's a necessity to collapse the universality of the anthropocentric flows, being in many eras and senas. Thus, it's both a necessity and intriguing thing to be being in multiplicity in order to talk to humans without humans. This is why when we leave the zone, when the technological, the historical, and the linguistic are not a human category at all, we lose the links with the so-called humanity, which also never existed as a universal category to talk about the human. And the actions are made. The important thing that they are made by all being Earth, all planetary entities in their own cosmolocality, the multiple territorialities of the Earth itself, each connected to each other and to the cosmos itself. For example, in extractivist zones of lithium crescents, both microorganisms, beings, Earth, in alliance with the mineral entities and indigenous and other people, suffocated without access to clean water, resist the green colonial capitalist economies, losing and seeing the death of their land. And also de-anthropologizing and de-territorializing the concept of death, which is very important to see what is the death of the territories, of the vegetal, which is the compost, the process of decomposition of the corporeal in the desert. It can be seen as a symbio geo-archive narrative matrix, a matrix of multiple histories and biographies of all beings, Earth, that connect with each other in such a way that they form a textile as a meshwork in Castilla, in Spanish, onto tejido, llamamos, connecting this cosmology model to this practice, because there are many ways of inhabiting the worlds. And death here is also a form of adaptation and resistance. Because the boundaries between the living and the non-living are constantly being reprogrammed, and not only in geological alliances with microorganisms in extractivist zones. The complete putrefaction of the corporeal, becoming part of the soil and mycelial structure in the deep rainforest, or the ashes of some corporeal being earth thrown into the air of the Andean mountains. This is a being in territory, being with territory, feeling the territorial, and it is a form of communication with other beings, earth in their lands. And there is a proposal, and In anthropologies, now it's not anthropology, or anthropomorphologies proposed by Louise Armand, that going beyond the sense of Levi-Strauss, that for him it was more about practices, actions in times of disaster, especially environmental, in some concrete territory. Anthropology is going against the neganthropocenic logics, and where the capital has become an unconscious and unforeseen dimension of human activity, but as an additional actor, as a passenger of a capitalist economy. And we can see that anthropocentrism has become the other itself. This is something that is hard to grasp. Giving subjectivity to the anthropocentrism only gives it more power and it makes it more invisible. And yes, ecopoetically, anthropocentrism is very anthropocentric, it's very humanist, and must leave the terrestrial corporeal and xeno-decentralized. And reviewing epistemologies of the subjects, of the self, of the science itself, talking about the poorness of the human linguistic abilities, that which clothes us off from the earth and other beings, in the words of principles of post-linguistic term, with many other manifestations of semiotic connections and signs and post-semiotic sensibilities. Indeed, we can have, and we have another relation to the being in territory, how we feel about the territory, talking to other beings in their territory. And all of that is clearly expressed not only in the literate speaker's language. We can dehumanize the term humanity and the anthropocenter from the term human, the same concept of human, as well as its passengers, the concept of species, the concept of body and intelligence, that is not only the human thing. Thus, termed postanthropocentric or rather xenocentric worlds, they are not in the time space of ethics and even ontology. They're in actual multiple time spaces, and we are already being in them, and we are interacting them with everyday practices in being xenocentric. Saying this in Quechua, an indigenous language in Argentina, in Peru, and Bolivia, and other territories, Tucupacha na Karkan. This world have already always been, always present, like all that's earthling, as liberated. The lands and territorialities of Lithium Crescent are and is a cosmolocal time space, is distorted by eco-capital coloniality, but never stopped symbiogenesis and symbiosis with the earth. These processes regrettably going together. And this processuality of becoming is not a time space from the self-enclosed human who wants to build green technologies clearly in inverted commas, and opening door to the green colonial capitalism and multiple terracicides and epistemiциdes, which only alienate the anthropocentric from the human. So what can we do? Reconceptualizing the concept of what to redo, in Spanish, que rehacer. The idea is to write and think symbiographies, which appeared as if on a stretches in the book by Desperate of autobiography of the octopus. They speculating this term and giving new resignification to the territorial sense. Symbiography is the work of multiple beings gathered in the same territory body and put in scene diverse lives, where the text or any other form is a space of memory. Current and near, and where denominated autobiography becomes something more because it tells the multiple history of the whole local community, expressing the tragedy of violence, the anger, and the heartbreaking lack of hope, like it was in a book. Symbiography has enormous potential as a methodology for working and thinking with being Earth about any territoriality that becomes, in inverted commas, to a sacrifice zone. It is a complete decomposition of the autobiographical into symbiocampus of cosmological histories, multiple modernities, queering the phylogenetics forms of being in the Earth, and all chemical and mineral assemblages. In a special effective perspective, being with symbiographies as a multitemporal, pluriversal space-time of resistance, where territories and temporalities are breaking their own borders in themselves. With them, the ties with territory are much stronger, and where there are not close relations between languages and humans, rather between any language structure, semiotics, and territory. In any form, especially it is necessary to create symbiographies with technologies, as I can see, also in the competition of images. I like it because they also have them, thus creating electronic symbiographies. And in this, we can avoid the extended, that is the main objective of the environmental neoliberalism, where the end of the human entropically always delayed. Technology requires an enormous amount of geological. In the future, there may be much more than now. Some rare or even unknown minerals, but what if so-called technological singularity will occur in capitalism without any human help? There is not and never has been a binary between the technological and the vital natural, following also Yukui, the Hong Kong, with the idea of technodiversity in conjunction and identical with biodiversity. This binary is revealed as a trap with no way out. The technological is the not properties of the post-human, which does not refer to the transhuman, but links the geological and the technological in xenocentric worlds. Life itself, its processuality, the non-organic corporeal, like lithium, it's a process itself, like all geochemical processes, with its own temporality and alliances. And speaking about the presence of the Argentina in the cosmolocalities of lithium crescents and as well as in other territories without romanticizing the extractivist resistance in a planetary resistance, it is a planetary resistance to the patriarchal, eco-colonial capitalist extractivism. The international and national mining companies, together with the current government of Milei, tempted by the so-called resources of these territories, and making the life of all beings Earth unbearable economically, ecologically, destroying the ways of being in territory, are at war with the Earth itself, with indigenous populations, the seniors, students, people below the poverty lines, birds, microorganisms. This kind of war is a complex of self-relations. With symbiographies, with which we are in contact with other beings, Earth, especially phylogenetically distant, they can be coming with us and smash the myth of the impossibility of the end of capitalism, of the impossibility of the alternative, of total radicalization. So there's no humanity. All existence is a infrastructure that is inherently accelerationist in emergent computation, in an entroped structure, the Internet of everything, meshed interstructure, as not only internets of humans, but things, mycelia, in planet itself. Yeah, thank you.
So our final speaker is Blend Reka. Blend's work focuses on an often overlooked aspect of human-animal relationships, the retirement of assistance dogs. His presentation, titled Preparing for Assistance Dog Retirement, Information for Assistant Dog Users Available in the Public Domain, will shed light on the emotional and practical challenges faced by individuals during this transition and the gaps in resources available to support them. So over to you, Blend. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Blend, and I'm a third-year medical student at Anglia Ruskin University. And I undertook a 10-week research internship at Anglia Ruskin University, funded by the National Institute of Health and Research. And during our research, we looked at preparing for assistance dog retirement with a specific focus on the information for assistance dog users available in the public domain. I'd also like to acknowledge the co-authors, Sophia Gray, Zoe Thompson, Debbie Emerson, Nikki Van Bergel, and Hilary Angwood. So moving on to the introduction. So assistance dogs, they are essential in the well-being of many individuals with physical and mental health challenges. They provide not only support with the daily tasks, but companionship with these handlers, and they provide an essential part in their life. And they develop this emotional bond with the dog handlers. And when these assistance dogs retire due to health or old age, many of these handlers struggle with that fact, and they go through feelings of depression and struggling to find a new assistance dog. And there aren't many information available online to help them with this process. So this research is basically to help bridge the gap in the research of this topic by reviewing the non-academic information of the sources of the retirement of assistance dogs and analyzing the non-academic information available on the retirement of assistance dogs to help bridge the gap in information and help in the improvement of the assistance dog, retirement of the assistance dogs. So here are my research objectives. So I have a few research objectives. So the first one is to explore and review the gaps and limitations in current online resources and social media regarding information on assistance dog retirement, to analyze and identify common themes with these sources, particularly around the emotional and practical challenges of retiring an assistance dog, to suggest a one welfare approach that considers the needs of both assistance dog users and their dogs, with recommendations for enhancing support during the retirement phase. And to carry out this research, we took a thematic analysis approach. We collected the information from what was called grey literature, which is non-academic source like social media, assistance dog organization websites, and online articles. By using thematic analysis, it allowed us to identify patterns and recurrent topics, helping us understand the main challenges associated with assistance dog users and what types of resources were currently available to them online. So the sources of data, we used grey literature, such as non-academic sources like social media, websites, and online articles. Examples could be such as Facebook group, assistance dog organization pages, user blogs, and online forums. The data collection process, we used a systemic approach for publicly available resources on assistance dog retirement, focused on platforms commonly used by assistance dog handlers. And the thematic analysis organized content into themes to identify recurring challenges and gaps. And we use a qualitative approach to understand emotional and practical aspects of retirement. Moving on to my findings. So there are three common themes which I pointed out during the findings from my methods, and that is the policy, practice, and access to information. And regarding the policy of the assistant dog, I bullet pointed three main areas, one being the retirement age, the welfare approach, and the legal and ethical considerations. So most assistance dogs retire between the ages of 8 to 10 years old. And but they could retire younger depending on the health and specific organizational guidelines. So many dogs, they can retire due to bad health, and meaning they will have to retire early. One welfare approach, priority on the wealth of the dog and the post-retirement environment. So when the dog retires, there's not much resources or information available to what happens to that assistance dog when they retires. So we did look at the welfare of the dog as well after they retire. legal and ethical considerations. So we looked at policies to ensure dogs are not overworked and maintain a high quality of life during their retirement. So the practice, I bullet pointed two main areas: the post-retirement care and the adoption processes. So we emphasized on ensuring retiring dogs are well-being with regular veterinary care and comfortable living situations. And the adoption processes, formal processes are common, with potential adopters being screened to ensure stability. So this will help the assistant dog user and the assistant dog itself have a home once they retire. And the access to information, I bullet point three main areas: the sources, the support available, and social media versus websites. So the sources I used were primarily charity websites, preprints, articles, dissertations, and social media. And the support available focus on preparing owners for the retirement transition and ensuring retired dogs are well cared for. I also looked at social media versus websites. So social media, they would highlight personal struggles which are not often mentioned by charities or on official websites. An example of this would be is a lady which I messaged on a Facebook group chat on assistance dogs, and she was going through the retirement phase of her dog being retired, and she was looking for a new assistance dog. And she was telling me the struggles of that as she developed an emotional connection with her first assistance dog. And she was struggling to find a new dog, as the new dog would not be able to match the personal struggles she would have. And she would explain how tough this would be on her current assistant dog and the dog that she was currently training. And these struggles are not something mentioned by websites, and it's something I believe should be highlighted more. So the findings for the post-retirement challenges, I key pointed out the emotional and psychological impact, the financial constraints, logistical and space limitations, second dog syndrome, and lack of structured support. So in emotional and psychological impact, experience anticipatory grief exacerbated by strong emotional bond and daily reliance on the dog. So many of the assistance dog users, as I've mentioned, they develop a strong emotional bond with the dog. So when it's time for them to retire, they go through feelings of depression and feeling low for quite a long time, as that dog has been part of their life for such a long time. And when they have to let it go, it's like a strong feeling of sadness and not wanting to let it go. And this can cause some major psychological impact, which needs to be addressed more, as it's not really addressed on any websites, or very few websites would address this feature. Financial constraints is another feature we need to consider. So there's financial limitations can make it difficult to care for both a retired dog and new assistance dog simultaneously. So many dog users may not have enough space or might not have enough money to care for both dogs. So they would have to let the old assistance dog retire, or they have to adopt it to someone else. And that could be due to financial constraints, which is something we have to consider. Logistical and space limitations. So not all users have the space or resource to care for two dogs, which fits in with the financial constraints. There's also something called second dog syndrome, which the process of bonding with a new dog can create conflicting emotions. So how I describe second dog syndrome is the dog user, when they have a new dog, they feel like that new dog is more inferior and not as good as the first dog. And that's due to that connection they built with the first dog, and anything new that comes in won't be as good as the first one they have. And that is something we need to consider as well. And there's a lack of structured support. So there's limited support or guidance available for assistance dog users facing retirement phase. And that is something that we need to make more readily available on the internet. So we also made sure to do a one welfare approach when conducting this research. And what one welfare is a holistic framework that recognizes the interconnected well-being of humans, animals, and the environment. So I pointed out 3 areas. So the support for handlers, we want to provide emotional and psychological support during loss of an active working relationship with the dog, and offer financial guidance to manage costs associated with keeping a retired dog. As this is an area which you notice is not really supported during the retirement of assistance dog, and would greatly help the handlers. For the welfare of a retired assistance dog, we want to ensure accessible veterinary care for dignified retirement and develop programs to support rehoming when handlers cannot keep the dog. So we want to make sure that there's accessible veterinary care, so that when the assistance dog does retire, they have a place where they can retire and be cared for, as there's not many organizations, they don't mention what would happen to the retired assistance dog when they retire. Community and social support. So we want to raise awareness about the unique challenges of assistance dog retirement and promote community initiatives offering resources like mental health services and practical guidance. Like I've mentioned, assistance dog owners can go through mental health issues when the dog retires, as is like losing someone you care about very deeply, and having someone you rely on for such a long time, and they've lost that person or the assistance dog. It can cause great challenges. So here are my implications and recommendations. So my implications are, I've bullet point 2 implications, which is 1, the need for comprehensive support, and 2, the gaps in information accessibility. So the need for comprehensive support is we want emotional, financial, and logistical challenges, and there's limited resources for guidance and structured help. As I've mentioned before, there are emotional, financial, and logistical challenges that occur for when an assistance dog retires, and this is something that we need to address. And there are gaps in the information accessibility. So when I was partaking in the research and gathering the information and collating it in my Excel spreadsheet, it was very difficult to find specific information on retirement of assistance dog. And I think this has to be something that's more readily available for when an assistance dog user does retire, and so they have a place to go to it and they know what to do after the dog retires. And here are my recommendations. So I'd like to develop a centralized resource, so create a dedicated platform or hub for assistance dog retirement information with accessible guidelines and support. Establish emotional and financial support programs, so introduce support groups, counseling, and financial aid programs to assist with costs and emotional challenges. And this will help greatly with the mental health aspect of the dog user when their assistance dog retires. Promote a one welfare initiatives, so advocate for a holistic approach to ease transitions for handlers and dogs. And collaborate with assistance dog organizations, so partner with organizations to standardize best practices for retirement, ensure consistent support. So there are many assistance dog charity organizations, especially in the UK, and most of them do mention retirement of assistance dog, but not many of them mention like the support they offer for like the for the dog user when the dog retires. So by collaborating with them and expressing these concerns, I think it would help greatly in this matter. So to conclude, assistance dog retirement is a significant transition with profound emotional and logistical challenges for the handlers, and current resources are limited and scattered, highlighting a gap in accessible support and guidance. My key takeaways are the emotional impact that between the handlers and their dogs make retirement difficult, often leading to stress and anticipatory grief. Practical challenges. So the financial and logistical constraints can prevent users from keeping their retired dogs or managing 2 dogs. My final thoughts is adopting a one welfare approach can help create a compassionate, holistic support system that addresses the needs of both handlers and their assistance dogs during the retirement transition. Bridging the gap through centralized resources, support programs, and organizational partnerships will improve the quality of life for assistance dog users and their retired companions. And this all, I hope, would be able to greatly help the assistance dog users in their struggles with the retirement process. I'd like to make my final acknowledgements. The project was funded by the following grants: the NIHR School of Medicine Research Internship, the ARU Health Performance and Wellbeing Fund, and the ARU Participatory Research Fund. Thank you very much for listening, and are there any questions?